Servus, Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. It is time to talk about the European Union, I think. As you all know, I made a video about the outcome of the recent elections for the European Parliament, and it is not just the Parliament that was elected. Now is also the time to actually fill a lot of important positions within the European Union. For example, the presidency of the European Commission, the presidency of the European Parliament, among some other positions. Also, the head of the European Central Bank comes to mind. It is actually quite interesting to look at how these people are appointed and how these positions are filled. The rules are not quite clear and there are a lot of shady backdoor deals going on. And the outcome of the parliamentary elections didn't make it much easier. So in this video, I want to try to explain to you guys how this is supposed to be working in principle, in theory, what the status quo was until this year's elections, and what paradigms are actually clashing at the moment in the European Union and how things could proceed from here. So it is a video about civics, I guess, about European history and about the European Union. So even though we all know, I guess, that things aren't really happening like that in reality, in practice, let me just tell you nevertheless how things are supposed to be working in the European Union. It is an open secret that were the European Union a candidate state for membership in the European Union, it would be deemed as undemocratic and therefore it would not be eligible for membership in the EU. Among many other things, a lot of the criticism that is hurled towards the European Union is that it is inherently undemocratic. The only body of the European Union that is actually directly elected by the European people is the European Parliament. And it is just this European Parliament that doesn't have a lot of power. It can vote or must vote on some of the laws, but it doesn't have the right to propose laws. And a parliament that cannot even propose any laws is a ridiculous affair altogether, I think. So the only body in the European Union that has the right to propose new laws is the European Commission. You can imagine the European Commission to be the quasi-government of the EU. They are enforcing the laws and they check that the contracts are not broken between the member states. They also represent the European Union in foreign politics, and as I said, they have the initiative in the legislature, and that is actually something that is violating the principle of the division of power, I think, but this is the way it is right now. So the president, the head of the European Commission at the moment is still Jean-Claude Juncker of Luxembourg, and you can imagine him to be something like the European emperor, the Kaiser of Europe. And his term just ended now, and there is a new guy who must be appointed now. Now let me tell you how this normally works. There is a body called the European Council, and it is made up of the representatives of the governments of the member states. They propose to the European Parliament a candidate for the president of the European Commission. And the parliament then has an election to approve of this candidate then. Now the last time that this election was had was in 2014, and there was still something like a European Grand Coalition then. That means the largest party, the European People's Party, that is all the Christian conservative people, and the Social Democratic Party of Europe, all the socialists and social democrats, right? They were the second largest party, and they had a consensus that the head of the European Commission would be a conservative guy and the president of the parliament would be a socialist. That was Jean-Claude Juncker of Luxembourg for the European People's Party is the head of the commission, and Schulz of the Social Democratic Party is the president of the parliament, or used to be. And that was a consensus that kind of worked, but the Grand Coalition, not only in Germany, as you know, doesn't have a majority anymore, also in Europe, they don't really have a clear majority any longer. So this makes it very hard to choose a candidate that the parliament would accept then. And here is where it becomes interesting. Now this time a new approach for the election was tried. It is actually pretty much like the system that we have in Germany. Our chancellor is also not directly elected by the people, but we elect our parliament, the Bundestag. The party with the most seats in the Bundestag normally is charged with the responsibility to forge a stable government coalition, and then the largest party in that coalition also will determine who is chancellor from their own ranks. And normally it is done that all the major parties in the election campaign already declare to the public who is going to be their prime candidate for chancellor. In other words, they say, if you make our party the strongest party in parliament, this guy is going to be your next chancellor. This is actually a system that is very transparent because the voters, both in theory at least, in an ideal world, they would know what kind of a program they're voting on and also who's going to be the head of government if their party becomes the most powerful party after the election. Me as a German, of course, I actually like this idea. So in this prime candidate kind of approach was tried out this year in the European elections. The European People's Party, for example, declared the Bavarian Manfred Weber of the CSU their candidate for the presidency of the European Commission. And the Social Democrats said that Frans Timmermans from the Netherlands would be their prime candidate. The Liberal faction chose the Danish politician Margrethe Vestager. I hope I pronounced that somehow correctly. And a little reminder, of course, the European People's Party has the most seats, then the Social Democratic Party, and the Liberal faction only comes in at third position. So according to this plan that the major parties declare their primary candidate, as the European People's Party has the most seats in the European Parliament, Manfred Weber would actually be the candidate or the person for the job of the president of the European Commission. And according to how things went before, maybe Frans Timmermans then could be president of the European Parliament. But the problem is now that the parliament cannot decide on that. And the idea that was originally put in place in order to strengthen the role of the European Parliament is now actually jeopardized by the fact that the parliament cannot decide on a candidate. Of course, it is the European Council's job to propose them, but they are actually, just right now they were meeting, and their job is of course to find a candidate that will not be rejected by the parliament, because then there would be a conflict between the parliament and the European Council. And just to interject here, don't confuse these different bodies. There is a Council of the European Union, and then there is a European Council and a Council of Europe. So there are some links that I provide in the sources down below. Don't confuse these three organizations. The Council of Europe is an international organization that technically doesn't have anything to do with the European Union. Then the European Council, as I said, is the heads of the government of the member states, and in this process their job is to propose a candidate for the job of the president of the European Commission. And then there is a Council of the European Union, which is a legislative body next to the European Parliament, and their job is also, it's a little bit confusing, their job is also to represent the member states. And the presidency of the Council of the European Union is always changing from member country to member country, and they have actually nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. So I think they should have chosen different names for all these institutions. It's a little bit more confusing. Maybe in Game of Thrones they would have come up with cooler names, but it is like that right now. So as I said, the heads of government are at the moment, or they were until today, actually negotiating, and it is actually France, it is Emmanuel Macron who wants the Danish politician Vestager to be the president of the commission, even though her party is only the third strongest party in the EU Parliament. Merkel, on the other hand, is of the opinion that the prime candidate of the largest party, that means in this case Manfred Weber, should be appointed. Macron is of course vetoing that, and I think Merkel was really angry about that, and she actually said if you don't accept Weber, then all the other candidates are actually off the table also, and then we have to find different candidates. And that could be then, for example, Christine Lagarde of the International Monetary Fund. As a provocation and a little attack on Merkel, Macron actually suggested that she should actually run. And I think she would actually be ratified by the parliament, no problem, I guess. But Merkel said that she really doesn't want to have a EU office. Maybe this is all theater play, stage play for the masses, but she actually was really angry about this. And she makes it clear time after time that she doesn't want to have a EU office. So what I find ironic or actually funny is that the way that Macron sees how things should be handled is actually more like it was in the Holy Roman Empire. Yes, remember, the Holy Roman Empire was not a centralized state like France. It was always a federation of different tribes, and certain regional princes and lords were given the title of Prince Elector. And they came together in the Reichstag and they made backdoor deals, right? They locked themselves up in the council chamber, and after lots of shady deals and corruption in order to form a consensus, at the end of the day, they proposed and actually elected the new emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. This process was not at all transparent, and these prince electors were not voted by the people, of course. But still, the emperor was technically elected by those lords. 3 of them were bishops, by the way. Now, on the other hand, France historically was a centralized kingdom. Absolutism, Louis XIV, Le Roi du Soleil, der Sonnenkönig, the King of the Sun. That is actually the way of thinking that is still so important to understand France today. Germany, on the other hand, a decentralized state. There was never one clear ruler, there was never one clear capital. France, on the other hand, there was Paris, that's the center. Just like the sun is the center of our solar system, Paris and the French king, the French absolutist monarch, was the center of the kingdom. And if you want to be anything in France, you have to go to Paris. No matter if you're in the financial world, no matter if you're in the administration, in academia, in the sciences, if you want to make something out of yourself, you have to go to Paris. In Germany, there is no clear center. In the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, the king was still traveling, or the emperor was still traveling from place to place in order to settle disputes among the lords and also to oversee his affairs there. If you want to understand German politics or the way Germans think about politics, you really have to study the Holy Roman Empire. It is an aberration of German history that one of our leaders actually tried to abolish the federal nature of Germany and tried to make Berlin, that he would call Germania then, the supreme centralist capital of all Germany. That is something that is an absolute aberration and totally un-German. The Holy Roman Empire lasted for almost 1,000 years and there was never one center. And even in Germany now, there is not one clear center. Even though Berlin is posing as our capital, it is by no means the center of Germany in any sense. This is why I find it so funny actually that among the people who promote the strengthening of the European Parliament are now the Germans actually, whereas the French promote a system that reminds me more of prince electors locking themselves up in a council chamber and then figuring it out among themselves. If you look at it from another perspective, however, it all starts to make a little more sense again. The parliament in France is also not so important. As I said, it is a presidential system like in absolutism, the monarch was the supreme ruler. The French Republic is tailored towards the president. The parliament is not that important. This is why Macron also doesn't really think that the European Parliament should be very important. He actually thinks that the power should be with the governments of the member states. And in a way, one can understand that. I mean, they were also elected. All the member states are republics or democracies, so they are legitimized, of course, by the people. But when it comes to European affairs, it would also make sense to say, okay, we have a European election and the major European factions should declare who should be their prime candidate for the head of the Commission. So you see, both paradigms have their merit and both can be understood in a certain way. The problem is just that up until now there is no clear candidate that everybody can kind of agree on, and it is pretty much fuzzy at the moment who has the actual authority. It is pretty clear that the heads of the member states have to appoint a candidate and that the parliament then has to vote for that guy. So now they said that they would meet on June 30th again in 1 week. Maybe something has changed until then. So this is how things should work in principle, and maybe in reality it's much easier. Maybe this is all a stage play for the masses, and in reality some Rothschild banker guy just calls Angela Merkel and tells her, Angela, I have a job for Emmanuel and you. Until next week, you have to spin it somehow to the public that this guy should be head of the Commission. Make it so. Chop chop. Who knows, right? Alright, so I wanted to tell you in this video how top offices in the European Union, and I concentrated here on the presidency of the European Commission, are filled, what the process is, at least in theory, and how the different paradigms, which are basically prevalent in France and in Germany, are colliding at the moment, and they are struggling to cope with the situation where the old alliance or the old grand coalition of social democrats and centrist conservatives is no longer powerful enough to actually form a consensus just among themselves. This not only makes the formation of a coalition in the European Parliament difficult, it also overall weakens the role and the strength of the Parliament, because the other institutions can say now, well, if the Parliament can't decide, then we have to decide for a candidate now, and you better acknowledge that person. In the worst of cases, that would result then in some kind of a stalemate where the European Council would appoint candidates and the Parliament would just reject them one after the other. Now, in the Holy Roman Empire, we called that interregnum, and I think in Europe you just call it Belgium, I guess. Alright, so be safe wherever you are. And here at the end I also translated a little snippet from a press conference that Angela Merkel did today. And here I think it is a Swiss journalist who asks her if she has any plans of becoming the head of the Commission or going into office in Europe. And she is actually a little pissed, but listen for yourselves. Servus, Kameraden.
Unser Ziel ist bis zum nächsten Sonntag, wenn wir uns zu einem erneuten Europäischen Rat treffen, dann Ergebnisse vorlegen zu können. Mich erstaunt dieses Ergebnis nicht. Ich habe von Anfang an gesagt, dass unser Ziel sein muss, bis zum Zusammentreten des Europäischen Parlaments eine Lösung zu finden. Also, dass wir das diesmal noch nicht erreicht haben, ist für mich keine Überraschung, sondern Teil des Prozesses, den wir jetzt durchlaufen müssen. Ich kann ganz klar sagen, ich möchte keine Entscheidung gegen Frankreich treffen und ich glaube, Frankreich möchte auch keine Entscheidung gegen Deutschland treffen. Und insofern müssen wir uns zusammenraufen. Das ist das, was die deutsch-französische Beziehung in der Frage auszeichnet.
Frau Bundeskanzlerin, sagen Sie immer noch Nein zu einem Spitzenjob, Spitzenposition in der EU?
Ja. Ich sage immer noch Nein. Und ich will vielleicht dann auch jetzt mal hinzufügen, weil es ja eine Frage ist, die mir sehr oft gestellt wird, dass ich ein bisschen traurig bin, dass meine Worte, die ich jetzt so oft gesagt habe, auch in der gleichen Weise scheinbar überhaupt nicht respektiert werden. Und ich finde, das könnte man tun.